All right, everybody, welcome to Naturalistics, discussion to help you become a better naturalist. My name is Stefan, and here with me is my co-host, Matt.
Hello, everyone.
And today on Naturalistics, we're going to be talking about what is a naturalist. This is our first episode, and we felt like it would be good to tackle this sort of central question to the premise of our podcast.
Yeah.
Right off the bat.
I mean, our name is Naturalistics, right? So I guess
that's our name.
We just added an istics to naturalist.
All right, so...
we're excited to share some naturalist perspective with everyone, so here we go. I'm going to start off with talking about our podcast goals, and these are really important to us because it's like why we're doing this. But the idea of this discussion, this podcast, is to help make you a better naturalist. So we really want to help people, help our listeners, help you improve in their skill and ability to be naturalists and to share that with people. And we, on a side note, we also want to inspire people to, I think I wrote, pick up the habit, as it were.
Yeah.
So basically our goal is to inspire naturalists and make you better at it, at what you do,
and make us better at the same time.
Yeah. There's some perks, I think, too.
So Matt and I both consider ourselves to be naturalists, and we're going to get into the definition, our definition of naturalists, and other definitions in our culture of what a naturalist is. But we're both naturalists by our own definition, and we are sort of part of being a naturalist to us is that you're always improving, always branching out, always learning new things, and so really the discussion is sort of like a well that can never run dry.
Definitely
in that respect. So I think we're naturalists, and we're always looking to learn new things, and we're by no means are we an expert in any of the areas that we are discussing. We have varying levels of knowledge across many different fields, and that's kind of part of what it means to be curious and always needing to learn. So
and we also want to mention that quite obviously, I guess it's we said it in the beginning, but this is a discussion-based podcast. So Stefan and I will have a topic, and we'll talk about it together. And today's topic just happens to be what is a naturalist. But we could be pretty off about something, is my guess. We could also be pretty right on. But we like to think of it as an ongoing conversation, discussion, and we like to think that we're not always right, but we can always improve, as Stefan just said, and that we love to hear what you think, and we think of these discussions, conversations, the podcast in general, as a launching point, really, for learning more and discussing further. So.
Right. Yeah. So as part of that, we sort of want to. We're both in on this discussion, and we want to bring as many other people in on this discussion as we can. So we welcome feedback, any kind, constructive criticism. Call us out if we do get something wrong, or if you disagree. We'd love to know what you think. So
definitely.
Don't be shy.
Tell us what you think, please.
So Matt, what is a naturalist?
Should we get right into it, huh?
What is a naturalist? That's our topic today.
Yeah. So
it's a big one.
Yeah, definitely. And it's something, I think you and I have talked about this for quite a while, way before we even thought of the idea of this podcast. It's something that it's interesting just because I feel like in my life, in my work, in my just in general, like I know so many people who self-identify as a naturalist, or like I know people that I think of as naturalists, and but there seems to be a lack of cohesion sort of around like what that actually means and what that like a definition, but even more broadly, just like what is it? Like it seems like people know what, like, I don't know, other things are, like, I don't know.
An
accountant, a lawyer, a doctor.
Yeah.
It's like more clear.
Yeah. What do you mean when you self-identify as a naturalist, or you say, oh yeah, that guy's a really brilliant naturalist? What exactly? It can be kind of an ambiguous term.
Yeah.
We're trying to sort of make it less ambiguous.
Yeah, exactly. So and so we're on that journey, and one of the things that I think is interesting is what the internet has to say about it, because in this day and age, it seems like the internet is everybody's go-to for any kind of question.
Certainly.
So we decided to point that question at Google and such.
Yeah.
So we Googled, what is a naturalist?
Yeah, it's kind of like the minimum energy commitment to doing some research.
Yeah, and at some level, it's like, let's say you were just someone who heard about naturalists and like wanted to maybe find out about it. That's probably what you're going to do.
Yeah, this
you're
could be
a young person,
your first impression.
and so in some ways, it really is a touch point for the question itself.
Right. So, right off the bat, you type in "what is a naturalist" into a Google search engine, and the Google these days is giving you like a little. I think it draws a definition for a question like this. It'll draw a definition from the top search result and just put it right there above all the search results, and it says naturalist. It's a noun. An expert in or student of natural history, and synonyms: natural historian, life scientist, wildlife expert. And the second definition is a person who practices naturalism in art or literature. So some sort of brief, still a little unclear.
I mean,
a student of natural history it's sort of like saying a biologist is a student of biology.
Yeah, it really is.
And so it's a little unsatisfying.
Yeah.
As a it doesn't really make things more clear from what we're looking for in a definition.
Yeah.
So
I mean, natural history is pretty much what naturalists do. So it's like you said, it's like using the word in its own definition.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really doesn't say anything.
And the second definition there practices naturalism. That naturalism is a whole other thing that just happens to share a name. It's really pretty different, and we don't really get into that too much.
It's a philosophy, and naturalists can have philosophies, but it's not for us.
When we say naturalist, we're not talking about the philosophy naturalism. Just to be clear, it's a different thing that shares a name
for sure
in a way.
Yeah, well, and that's an interesting segue, because when you look, so Wikipedia, which you might think would be a really great source for a definition of naturalist, they don't have one. They don't have a definition for naturalist.
There's no Wikipedia page for naturalist.
What happens if you Wikipedia naturalist? You get naturalism, back to the philosophy thing. And I'll just touch on this real quick, but naturalism is the idea or belief that only natural, as opposed to supernatural or spiritual, laws and forces operate in the world. So yeah, I mean, it's related a little bit, but it's just really not. We're not philosophers, and that's just not really what we're about. So again, really unsatisfied with the internet on that one. What about Urban Dictionary?
Urban Dictionary is more for a laugh than anything else. The top definition on Urban Dictionary is someone who believes that studying physical sciences, nature, or natural history can help answer most, if not all, of our questions. Which is pretty close to the mark.
Yeah, but it's also really similar to that last one, the philosophy definition.
Yeah, it doesn't really necessarily define a naturalist like what we're talking about. It's more of a philosophy based description.
And it's like a little like humorous, and it's like can help answer most, if not all, of our questions. It's like like can just answer everything. It's like a little kid.
Yeah.
Answer or something like that.
Yeah, so that really doesn't do it for us either. The secondary definition is hilarious. It says that a naturalist is a person with tendencies to do everything with a natural style, someone who has true personality, an individual with a natural fresh that isn't affected by trend or conforming style, a man or woman that feels that they act natural, doing everything, not faking or putting on a front to fit in. And using it in a sentence, a couple of sentences here we have, wow, that guy is just doing whatever he wants. He doesn't care about what we think. That's got to be a naturalist. And another, oh man, he fresh. I don't really see anyone like that. He a naturalist.
Oh yeah.
So,
I mean,
here we have sort of slang, weird like cultural use of the word naturalist.
I mean, I'm hoping that nobody came to the podcast trying to find out something about that kind of naturalist.
You're not going to get that from us.
No.
You're not going to get that from us.
I'm not sure. I mean, maybe, but I don't know.
That's not our top priority.
But yeah, so yeah. Again, it's like what that's those are the definitions of the Urban Dictionary.
So it's still really unclear. Like,
yeah,
it's unhelpful.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like to me that you basically get pointed in the direction of natural philosophy, or
spiritual naturalism,
which more philosophy, and then the hilarious definitions that aren't really definitions, like a naturalist is an expert or student of natural history.
Yeah,
says nothing. Yeah, so totally unsatisfying. And on a side note, just go check out YouTube for the same thing. This is not a video podcast, so we're not going to be looking at those, but I just encourage you, if you're interested, to go to YouTube. What is a naturalist? There's some hilarious videos,
and it's basically the same kind of thing,
right?
But in YouTube form rather than text form.
Yeah, so
just as sort of unclear with regard to what we're trying to get at here.
Right. Yeah, and definitely it's weird. What makes it weird is that there are so many naturalists, and there's so many people doing natural history, and but it just seems like there's this big black hole where the cohesion of a definition would be.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to fill that gap here a little bit. We're just gonna try. We're gonna put ourselves out there a little bit and just see if we can take a stab at that one. That's really what we're trying to do with this episode here. So, like we said before, we're gonna take a stab at it, and if you have any thoughts, shoot them our way. And really, the main thought that we have is based around this idea of a triforce. I'm gonna get to that in a second. But when I was thinking about this with Stefan, we were trying to think of. I had this idea of a metaphor for a cake, of like baking something. And so the question is like, what are the ingredients that go into this cake that create a naturalist. So if you take a little bit of this off the shelf and put a pinch of that from the cabinet, and you bake it at the right temperature, what are those things that get you to a naturalist? And so I was exploring that and thinking about, there's this characteristic and this kind of thing that people they do.
Like throw some of those out. Like curiosity is one
Definitely.
that I think of.
Yeah.
Thirst for knowledge.
Just a love of the outdoors. A good memory was something that I've seen a lot of naturalists have that. I mean, these are some characteristics that I was thinking when we were first thinking about this. We're like, what are those things are critical to putting into the cake? Yeah. And then you get your naturalist cake.
Yeah. What's the frosting? What's the candles? Yeah. And what's actually the cake itself? Like what if you take off all the frosting and the candles and everything else, all the garnishes, what you're left with? Like, what is that?
Definitely. And the thing was that Stefan and I do this a lot with various things, but it's picking things apart, so to speak, or like
dissection,
some reductionist logic. Splitting hairs would be a good way to say that. Hairs. Okay, so we're going to split these hairs here, but the thing is, like, the real question was, what is a naturalist, and what if you take away everything else? Is still left, and they're still a naturalist, so to speak.
So, like, what if you were to take away one more thing? Would you lose it all?
Exactly. Would it no longer be what it was before? So like with the cake, it's like cake usually has flour and sugar and eggs,
leavener.
It has a few of these ingredients, but if you took out flour or like something like that, like it's no longer.
Is it a cake without leavening? Like without anything that leavens it,
or any sweetener, any sugar? Yeah. Is it a cake or is it now bread?
Yeah, it's a good point.
Is that something else?
Could still be something, but it might be something else.
So basically, what we want from that question of what is a naturalist is an answer that looks like you can't reduce it anymore, and it's still a naturalist.
It's like a prime number.
It kind of is. It's a little like mathematical in that way, and and what kind of we came to is this idea of the Triforce, and it turns out it's not exactly like a bunch of ingredients mixed together so much as a process, and that's why it's a Triforce. It's a triangle that has 3 parts to it, and it's kind of like each part feeds the other part. And I'm going to go into those. So the top, I want you to picture the triangle in your mind.
Picture a triangle.
Got it? Okay, so the top of the triangle, the Triforce, is observation. Oh, no. My bad. Curiosity.
Curiosity, the big question mark.
Definitely. So curiosity is really, it's like the foundation and the beginning of all this naturalist stuff. It's the question that gets you going. So you can asking a question about nature or just being curious, that's the first part. Now bring your mind's eye down to the left side of the triangle, and that's where observation is. And so observation is the direct experience of out in nature or wherever of what you're curious about. So it's looking at things and just creating data, so to speak, of the things that you're watching. So sometimes those observations can be written down. Sometimes they're just in your memory. Sometimes they're in data sheets on the computer or whatever. Or they're drawings sometimes. There's just so many different ways to observe.
And collect information.
Yeah. Yeah, it's collecting without judging or like synthesizing, because that's the last part. Synthesis, the story. It's being able to take the curiosity and observations and create a story or a picture of what is actually happening. And it's the culmination of of the question. It's not necessarily the answer. Like most of the time, I would say it's not. It's just like a piece of the puzzle or something like that. But it usually leads you to further questions. So it goes back up to the top of the triangle where the process starts all over again. So you can see how it's kind of like, it's a cycle. It goes round and around where there's questions, there's observation, there's story, and it goes back. And again, story can be in so many different ways. Photographs, drawings, scientific papers, essays, poems. I mean, it's just like pretty endless. Literal storytelling, which is like the most ancient form, I think, of that.
Yeah.
In humans. But yeah, so that story can be told in many different ways. And basically, it's what this Triforce is that irreducible part of being a naturalist.
The core.
Like, when you take one of these three things out, the person is no longer a naturalist. Like somebody who only tells stories and asks questions, but never gets direct experience data from the world, is not a naturalist. That's what we might call an armchair naturalist, actually.
Which is not a naturalist at all.
No. I mean, there's many people who you might think are a naturalist or might consider themselves naturalists, and they only read books.
That's a good one. You can have questions and read books.
Yeah, that might draw your curiosity, but you don't get the raw
the dirt time.
experience.
The field experience.
And I've also seen people who they
don't share the story.
They don't share the story, yeah. That's what I was thinking of. And they just there's just lots of observation, just really not much there. Like trackers.
Very curious, very observant, but then that's as far as it goes.
Yeah. And so this is like the process, the core of the naturalist, really, is this Triforce.
And at its best, it's a positive feedback loop, right?
Yeah.
It reinforces itself. So like you're saying, that story, if it's not the end-all answer to your question, it may be a piece of that puzzle that leads you to further questions.
Yeah.
And so on, leads you to further observations.
Yeah.
And to further stories.
Yeah. And I think many naturalists have strengths and weaknesses within this triangle. Definitely. Like, some people ask incredibly amazing questions, and their curiosity is, like, boundless, but their observations are poor. Mm-hmm. Other people are insanely good storytellers with little data to back it up. But that's okay, but that's their strength.
Yeah, as long as the Triforce is intact.
Yeah, exactly. And and in some ways, you could imagine, like, the Triforce running at different speeds. And sort of the faster and the stronger each of those corners are, the better the naturalist is. Could be a way to think about it.
And that's one point when you think about who do you know who's a really good naturalist. I think we tend to think of people who are really experienced naturalists.
Yeah.
But I would argue that a good naturalist, the best naturalist, is anyone for whom the Triforce, as we have defined it, is working really hard. It's just they have a huge amount of momentum with that process, and that can be someone who's just breaking into a field. You just got into birding. If that Triforce is just humming around, you're a good naturalist. You may not know all the birds. You may not know where to look to find a given bird, like someone who has more experience might be. But you might actually be a better naturalist than someone who's been birding for years and years.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, and then the Triforce can be going really slow. I mean, there's some people that I can think, like, maybe they're like elderly or something. They don't get out very much, and their curiosity isn't quite at speed. I mean, and the thing takes many, many years to like come back around and like tell the story of like an observation. But they're still a naturalist. They're still paying attention and collecting that information and sharing it. And yeah, so, and I think part of what we're trying to do here is speed that process up a little bit. Or maybe not speed it up so much as strengthen it.
Strengthen it. Reinforce.
Yeah, and we're exploring, I mean, we just invented this theory, but I think that what we'll find is that a lot of what we're going to try to do with the podcast is explore observation. Like, what does it mean to, like, really observe? How can we be better at it? And then questions, like, how can we ask better questions? How can we dive deeper into our own curiosity? How can we find curiosity when we don't have it? How can we tell better stories? How can we be better artists? All those things. And again, it's not saying that we're incredible in all those areas, but we're just interested in exploring that and helping you all get better at doing that, if that's something you're interested in. So yeah, kind of exciting.
Yeah, so we'll be working on those points and we'll be working on some of the frills as well.
Definitely. It's not just
that stuff will come up too, and this is more just to help, especially for Matt and I, and maybe other people who think in the same way, who really like to distill something out. It allows us to move forward with a clearer picture of what we're talking about and what we're working on. So yeah, that's the Triforce.
Yeah.
I do want to mention one thing, which when Matt kind of came up with this idea, and when he first introduced it to me, he drew the Triforce in the road salt that had collected on the back of my truck. And so this is how I was first introduced to this idea. And one of the interesting points that Matt made that struck me, and that I sort of, I took it in, and then I kind of had to chew on it for a while. So for a few weeks, I was chewing on this idea, and it was he said the observations don't necessarily have to be real, and the story doesn't necessarily have to be true. And I at first I was thinking, what? Observations don't have to be real, story doesn't have to be true. Like that doesn't sound right. But as I chewed on it, I think I got a hold of the meaning of that, and I found that it was actually a really important point, and something that maybe distinguishes the Triforce, which could easily look like the process of science.
Yeah.
And I feel like this point that you made is key in distinguishing the Triforce from science, from a hypothesis where our curiosity is at the top of the triangle,
right,
and experiment and data collection in bottom left, and results in conclusion in the bottom right.
Yeah.
So this idea that the observations don't have to be real, the story doesn't have to be true, and so I just want to jump in with a couple quick examples of that I was thinking. Say you are trailing an animal, and you're new to tracks identification, and you think, I'm trailing a bobcat, and you trail this animal, and you have this great day, and you're sort of following it and reading into the story of what happened, and then maybe a few months later you learn a little bit more about track ID, and you realize that actually you hadn't been trailing a bobcat, you were trailing a fox. So what was the Triforce functioning for you? And I think based on that idea that observation doesn't have to be real, story doesn't have to be true, as long as the Triforce is active.
Yeah.
By that definition, I would say yes, that is valid. That's valid experience as a naturalist, and I think that's still being a good naturalist.
Yeah.
Another example I thought of was if you're maybe new to birding, maybe you don't even have a bird field guide, and you just have a bird feeder, and you're watching the birds at your feeder, and you see a finch with a reddish breast, and you think, it's a purple finch, and you're observing this bird's behavior, and it turns out it's actually a house finch.
Right.
It's still good. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the reason why I made that point, and I stand by it, is I don't want people to think that all observations need to be laboratory pure every time they're, like, written down or developed. Like, in other words, like, I want myself, you, our listeners, to understand that observations are exactly that. They're like what you see and what you experience, and whether or not it's true, like in the like epically big picture scientific sense, doesn't really matter. Because at the end of the day, it's about the process, and that's kind of what we're getting at with the Triforce in itself, is like, it's about the process and it's not about the results. And so, long story short is, just get out there, make observations, and don't worry about whether they're right or wrong. And in time, with enough observations and enough dirt time, you'll know, and it doesn't matter. So yeah, that's, I guess, what I mean to say on that one is just get out there.
Yeah.
There's something else I wanted to say, but I forgot.
Well, it reduces what could be a major hurdle for some people. To feeling like they could, get out and make valuable observations and to come back with a valuable story.
Yeah.
And ask valuable questions.
That's what I was wanting to say. It's something else which I might not have mentioned to you yet, but this idea that in science, the more broad and applicable the story is, the more important it is, and the more valued it is by the community. I want to propose that naturalists don't care about that. Like, the bigger picture of the story doesn't make it more important in our eyes. And I can give you an example of, if I can tell you a deep and incredible story about one individual animal and its life and its experiences based on my observations, that's just as valid as talking about the entire species as a whole. To a naturalist. To a scientist, it's way more interesting to know about all the individuals of that species. But to us, I think those are equally valid stories and observations to share.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah, I told my friend Kaya about that, and I think I told her about like the individual observation is just as important as the big picture. Like Darwin's theory of natural selection is just as important as the squirrel in my backyard. And she scoffed at that a little bit, but still refining. Yeah, so that's the Triforce.
Yeah,
and
we've already kind of touched on what it looks like in practice.
Yeah, I think so.
If you're feeling like you're still a little bit unclear on what that looks like in practice, bear with us. We're going to be coming back to this with stories, with our own stories, hopefully with some of your stories, possibly, and we're going to really make it clear what the Triforce, when it's just ticking along like a well-oiled machine, is supposed to look like.
Definitely. I'm going to name drop a little bit for a second here, because I just want to mention a few people who I think really operate well with this Triforce, and it's pretty clear from their books and what I know about them. And just some of these people are what we consider to be like the pinnacle of naturalists. Actually, and some would consider them scientists too. But Darwin, definitely.
Charles Darwin,
the guy who revolutionized biology with the idea of natural selection, was a naturalist. Pretty awesome naturalist. E.O. Wilson, who's works at Harvard, and he's done all kinds of, so much stuff with ants, but his stuff is like so amazing. We'll talk about him for sure. But E.O. Wilson, and then Bernd Heinrich, who's a guy who works at University of Vermont. He writes all kinds of books about like Winter World, Summer World,
Trees in My Forest.
Trees in My Forest, all kinds of stuff with ravens.
Really, like, not only is he a brilliant naturalist, he's a good writer. And
Yeah, definitely.
if you haven't come across Bernd Heinrich and you're interested in this stuff, his stuff is really, really fun to read. It's just it's not like reading a textbook.
Yeah.
His stuff is really just
Approachable.
Yeah, really, just it draws you in.
Yeah, and the thing about these three characters, and there's so many more people we could talk about, but is they really embody the Triforce in terms of like deep curiosity and questions, incredible dirt time and observations,
Dedication.
with watching their specimens or whoever they're dealing with, and then, like you were saying, the writing, the publication of the ability to put out what they observed is incredible. I mean, there's probably some people on their level with the curiosity and observation that we'll just never hear about.
Mm-hmm.
Because they just were not very good writers, or like just were not good at putting themselves out there. It's kind of natural selection in itself, I guess.
Naturalist selection.
A naturalist selection. We'll have to do an episode about that.
I select you.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are some name dropping.
Yeah. Okay. So, an important point. Why does it matter? We've sort of touched on this a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
But I think the Triforce is, when it comes right down to it, is basically a way of describing critical thinking, and it's important. Critical thinking is important in all aspects of our lives, and the Triforce is the sort of critical thinking, the core component of what it means to be a naturalist, and so it's important for the same reasons, because when you are on the Triforce, when the Triforce is active, and you're experiencing the curiosity and you're experiencing your direct observations, and you're gathering information, and you're sharing what you learn, or sharing what you have, sharing your questions that you end up with at the end. Maybe you have a story, but sometimes maybe you just end up with a bunch more questions, and all that makes you a more thoughtful human being.
Yeah.
And we need people to be really thoughtful. It benefits everybody else. If you think one Triforce is a really, really powerful. Another word we've used to describe this is dynamo. If you have one Triforce generating this energy around natural mysteries and learning more about the natural world, just imagine what happens when you get a bunch of those together. You're generating a tremendous amount of energy, and so the more people we have, in this state of the Triforce, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think it goes beyond just being a naturalist into just being a person and thinking in this way.
Yeah, for sure.
In all aspects of our lives.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, we'll probably do an episode about this, but why does it matter? I think one of the biggest things is it just the bottom line. It enriches your life so much to be a naturalist.
Yeah.
It just is so. Nature is everywhere. it's in cities, it's you, it's me. It's like literally around us 100% of the time, unless you're in virtual reality. But just checking. But there's just being able to tune into that and like draw enjoyment from all that stuff that's always around you, and to make it like a life passion, to pay attention to those things and share those stories and that curiosity. There's just nothing more enriching to your life. And like I said, we'll probably cover this in an episode, and there are so many stories of how that works. We just don't have time right now, this minute. But we'll get there.
Yeah. Yeah, the fact that you can do it anywhere is pretty cool. I remember as a kid, reading was a thing that I would do anywhere. I would have my book
under the desk in school,
and it would be in school. It would be on the bus to and from school. It would be in the car. It would be anywhere you have a few spare moments. Pull out the book and do it. And being a naturalist, practicing this this stuff is something that, like you said, you can do anywhere. You can do it in a crappy waste area. You can do it in...
Those are sometimes the best areas.
Edge habitats are awesome places to make observations of wildlife and learn new things about plants. And you can observe people behavior.
Yeah, weather. Just really, it's really an endless field of study.
Yeah. And that's one of the things, that you get these really old naturalists who have been doing this, and they've been doing it in all these different places and paying attention to all these different things, and they've branched out into all these different really obscure, little things. E.O. Wilson with his ants, and it's like, it's just there's something really satisfying about that.
And
that
it's just
kind of learning.
It's such a rich life, right? To have lived a life like that,
and to be able to share it with other people.
Yeah,
I think that's part of it. I mean, maybe that's just one of the ways in which I
community building
get a lot out of it. But it really, like, it's great for me to be able to, if I see some cool tracks on a hiking, crossing a hiking trail, and then I see, some other hikers shortly after that, I can say, hey, check out, take a look and check out this trail. Oh,
and you just enrich their lives. And I guess that's where, it's just, who doesn't love that? Like, everybody loves that stuff.
It's really gratifying. Gratifying stuff.
I guess, and what ties into what you said a couple minutes ago too, but the last thing I wanted to say on this, why does it matter, is it just allows you a deeper understanding of the world, I would say, on how people operate, on how things work, to understand the interchange of animals and plants and all this stuff is really just fundamentally to understand life. I mean, not saying that any of us naturalists truly understand that, but it just gives us a little window into the way things are, like, and how things have come to be the way they are. I don't know. Yeah, pretty cool.
That's just fascinating.
Yeah, fascinating. So we're going to leave you with a definition, because we preambled into that quite a bit, but we want to put this out there because we were pretty unsatisfied with our internet searches and what we found out there. So and the Triforce is a little clunky for a verbal definition, so kind of wrote it out into this. So
Triforce is more of a description than a definition.
Yeah. It describes the process, and this definition is definitely a process. So here we go. So the naturalist definition of a naturalist is this. A naturalist is someone who is curious about and finds enjoyment in observing the natural world through direct personal experience. They share their questions, results, ideas, and insights through storytelling, publication, photos, and many forms of arts and culture. So, so within that, there's definitely the Triforce. But we're going to put that out there when we can, and we'll see how many hits it gets. see if it takes over the world of naturalists.
Yeah.
But yeah, there you have it.
That's it for now. And thanks for listening. And again, let us know what you think. We welcome feedback, comments, questions, whatever you got. Send it our way. Yeah, get out there and make some observations.
All right. See you later.